Okay. I will call to order the meeting of the Public Works Committee this Friday morning at 9:03. First agenda item is concerns about Colonel Rosser Avenue and some traffic patterns that are going on there. So I will say that this is not the first time we've had this discussion. I know that Public Works has been very diligent in looking into this. This is at least the third time we've had this discussion, but certainly we're more than happy to bring it back up, because there is some resident concern. I know that Public Works has visited the site a few times. And I would say that, look, any action or inaction that we take, we really have to assess the impact of the overall surrounding areas as a whole. So let's keep that in mind when we're discussing this. So Mr. Glass and Chief, I guess we'll turn it over to you.
So I guess I'll go first. Just a little bit of background. The concerns really are Colonel Rosser and Union Alley, probably Union Alley more than Colonel Rosser, but just for those who may be listening, this is the Union Alley is the one that parallels Main Street to the south, and it's pretty much from Bond Street. It goes all the way to Old New Windsor Road or Doyle Avenue as it's referred to as well. But historically, alleys are just intended for services, much like trash removal, deliveries, that kind of thing. They are all substandard in width, and they do not allow for two cars to pass without one pulling over or stopping. It's again, they're not intended for heavy traffic use. I think there's always concerns with and issues with truck traffic in all of our alleyways. It's been that way to some level, at least, I think, since we stopped using horse and buggies on those alleyways. I think in this particular case, the issues were exacerbated due to the success of the restaurant Rock Salt. I think they had some increased deliveries and services because of that success, and of course that's something that we want, or not the damages part, but the success of Rock Salt. We have had some issues with some nearby properties and structures that were built basically to the edge of pavement. Some of those did occur by commercial truck traffic, and some did not. They were by domestic kind of car truck incidences. Originally, Public Works had proposed diverting as much of the commercial truck traffic, like deliveries and that kind of thing, to Main Street, and much of that has occurred. And I have to also say that the business owners have been overwhelmingly cooperative to minimize any of that discomfort in the rear alleys. But even saying that, there's still going to be truck traffic there, no matter what. It's going to be trash trucks, our own bulk pickup trucks. We have to be through there with snow plowing, and all that stuff is still necessary in Union Alley. Public Works also has suggested some solutions of converting Union Alley to one-way from west to east, basically in the block from Anchor to Bond, and or closing Colonel Rosser beyond the entrance to the parking lot, and creating a formal unloading zone on Main Street for the commercial truck traffic. That was back, as you had mentioned, we had talked about this a number of times, but that was back in January of 2018. We also suggested some signage changes to kind of filter through some of the irregularities at the Union Alley and Colonel Rosser intersection as well. We did make those changes, effected those changes back at that time, but since that time, there really hasn't been any other action taken place to change direction of alleyways or closures or that kind of thing. More recently, we were directed to obtain the traffic study. That was back in early November of last year. Received that proposal in the same month. But again, still at this point, there's been no further action with regard to approval to have that study completed. More recently, there was a suggestion to close Colonel Rosser below the parking lot entrance there where Harry Saranakis has the private lot. And that was only as a temporary measure, but there's been no confirmation to enact that change either. Happy to answer any questions, but I guess at this point, I would think that moving forward with the traffic study and would be in order. But certainly, as you mentioned earlier in the meeting, we certainly need to solicit the comments of any adjoining property owners and the public. I would suggest before any action's taken, just because first of all, there are means for formal alley closures, for instance, but there will be impacts to not just the property owners, but the general public as well, in the event that there is any action taken for these directions on the two alleys in question. So I guess at this point, I'm open to questions if there are any.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Glass. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Mr. Glass. I guess my question is regarding the traffic study, because you've talked about a traffic study, and so as the chief. I guess my question is, what data would we be looking for from the traffic study that would that would help us determine a course of action here? Are we looking for just the amount of traffic, the type of traffic, direction? What exactly would we be looking for from that study?
So there were kind of two parts to the study. One was more expensive than the other, but that included traffic counts, and it would determine the level of use, not just by commercial traffic, but by residential stuff, cars and trucks as well. What it would do, I believe, is either enforce or negate the idea of there being a wider spread problem, or if it's just something that's very localized there. So, I'm not a traffic engineer, and I don't want to speak for Tom, but I think he's mentioned that before as well. So if we had something from from a traffic engineer, I think that would be that we could point to and provide direction from that. Once we had the data, I think that would be a good step to a next step, if there are next steps beyond that.
Okay, thank you.
I could add a couple things if you like. So I know from our perspective, we have had over recent years collisions related specifically to the intersection there at Colonel Rosser and Union. It's as everybody here knows, it's a very tight turn. And there are residential garage structures that are abutting directly against the alleyway there. So physically, that presents an issue for vehicles that are large vehicles that are making that left turn off of Colonel Rosser onto the alley. And as everyone knows, back there, not only are there deliveries, but there's both commercial parking for the restaurants and some residential parking for apartments, so forth, right in that particular location. I think there's, at least the way I see it, two issues that we're kind of touching on here. One is the overall study of delivery trucks, large trucks over a certain size, and whether they should be restricted in certain streets, alleys, et cetera. And then there's the issue at this particular location based on the physical intersection and the limitations of making a turn at that intersection and the potential to continue to have a collision into the structure, specifically the garage that abuts that alley right at the intersection. So I think when we're talking about the traffic study, you could have the specific look at that intersection and how tight it is, and whether, it makes sense to restrict something specifically there because of the ongoing potential for collision. And as Mr. Glass brought up, if a vehicle's coming down Union and somebody's trying to make that turn, two things can't occur at the same time. It's just a very tight intersection. And then the overall idea of restricting truck traffic at certain locations, the impact that it would have on blocking traffic on main roads, and also where would you put signage up so that you would have to anticipate, are vehicles going to come in off of 27? Are they going to come in off of 31? Are they going to come in off of 140? And all the potential, ways that a truck that size could get on those roads, to figure out where to put your signs, because you got to make sure, if you're going to restrict it, that you put the sign placement is considered. And I think that bigger picture most definitely is outside, and I won't speak for Mr. Glass, but it's outside my wheelhouse to be able to look at that and come up with an answer to that larger truck restriction question. I think you need a traffic engineer to look at the big picture and to give us, their professional opinion on what we can and cannot do, what's feasible. And then I think the second issue is that specific intersection there at Colonel Rosser and Union. And if we decide to block it off at the parking lot, what the impact would be on the surrounding residential and business community, and maybe get feedback from all those stakeholders as to their feelings. I know there's been some, issue about the city moving forward in a timely manner to address this, but I think you could probably get that feedback fairly quickly, or set a deadline for that piece of it. So I kind of see it as those two things, and maybe I'm missing some part of this, but that's just my thoughts.
In addition to that, as I'm sure we all know, but I just want to reiterate, there will be some truck traffic that's necessary that we won't be able to restrict, and that's going to be certainly the trash trucks. If it's we can put signage up, but again, there's no other way to for those services to take place other than the use of the alleys as well.
Mr. Yingling. So
Mr. Mayor.
I guess looking at, so the reasons that both of you have for wanting a traffic study are completely reasonable. I agree with all of them. But I guess when I look at the big picture here, I look back at the complaints and the requests that this particular resident has made over the last few years, and then I look at how we could possibly solve all of them and what that would take. And this is what I've kind of laid out. So you have multiple issues. So you have the trucks that are turning off of Colonel Rosser onto Union. And that appears to be an issue, legitimate issue. The trucks are clearly, at times have had trouble making that turn. It's a hard turn to make. I understand that. The last time the residents came into a council meeting to make a public comment about this, they said a truck hit their garage or their shed. I don't know what we're calling it. Are we calling it a garage or a shed there? I guess it's a garage. So, and they wanted us to do something about it. But further investigation and ask some questions, the truck that hit that was not a commercial truck. I forget if it was a pickup or an SUV. I believe it was two people in the car actually having some sort of a disagreement or a physical fight while they were driving. Maybe they were intoxicated. I don't remember, before they hit the shed or the garage. Nothing we do unless we totally shut down the alley would have prevented that, for instance, right? So when they came in, they asked for action. I don't know what would have shut that down. That's not a commercial truck issue. It wasn't a Colonel Rosser alley issue. We've also gotten complaints about snow removal. I believe there was a couple of inches of snow that was piled up in front of their garage that they had to go clean up, that they thought was the city's. I did reach out. I believe our superintendent of streets went out and took a look at the situation. He felt that it probably wasn't our plow that did it. There's no 100% way of knowing, but he thought it wasn't our plow that did it. And that it was most likely the plowing of a private parking lot there that caused that snow. But if you looked at the pictures that he sent, he probably would have thought it came from the Colonel Rosser plowing, actually. But that's not something we can really control either. If that was, if that really, if it was, what we think it is, which is the plowing of a private parking lot. So then we had the issue of if we're going to restrict commercial truck traffic back there, which we could say that we're going to restrict it. But then, like you said, there's some truck traffic that's going to have to get back there. And the truck traffic that doesn't have to is then going to have to block off Main Street. I don't know if there's a good way to do it so we don't block off Main Street unless we get rid of parking spaces. A lot of parking spaces on Main Street in the one area of town that I think people have legitimate parking issues. Everywhere else we have parking garages. That's the one part of town where we don't have like a parking garage or like some place for like overflow parking. And then there's enforcement, right? So we can say all day we don't want trucks to go back that alley in Union, but then there's we don't exactly have we're not going to be able to keep an eye on that alley all day every day. So I feel like every solution that we'd have to put in place, and there would be several of them. I don't think it's just in order to fix all the things that all of the problems that this resident has asked us to try to solve, we would have to implement a lot of things. And I don't know if making that alley one way does any of those. I don't know if that actually solves anything other than the fact that sometimes two cars come head to head there and one of them has to back up. That's happened to me. I think that's happened to everybody that's ever been in Westminster or has lived here in that alleyway. It's always a little annoying, but I don't think accidents are caused that way. I mean, you'd have to be going really fast for an accident to be called that way, or really not be paying attention. I guess the one truck that hit their garage that they were fighting inside, that could happen, but I don't think there's anything we can do to stop people from fighting inside of cars other than enforce it once we catch them doing it. So I guess the reason I'm asking about the traffic study isn't the validity of getting the traffic study done. But if we pay for it, it sounds like if we get it done, it would only make sense to get the one done that costs more money. I think that the bigger study makes more sense if we did a traffic study. But I guess when I'm looking at the big picture and like what problems there are to solve, is the information from the traffic study really going to help us solve all those problems? Because there's a lot of stuff going on back there. And the reality of it is we have a city that's like 400 years old. And we have small alleys, and I don't know if any of these things are going to solve that unless we just close the whole alley down, both of them. So I guess that's what I want. And I'm not saying, look, I'm not a traffic engineer. I know way less about this than everybody on the phone call. But I just wanted to bring those issues up. I want to make sure that we're talking about solving all the problems that have been brought to us by this resident, because if we spend all this money and go down this road and cause other issues, and it's still only not even a half measure of solving the problems they want solved, what's the point of that? So I just wanted to have that discussion with everybody here, just so we're all on the same page, because this has been going on for a few years now in terms of the communication for this resident, and I don't know if everyone remembered all of the things that they've brought up. So I just wanted to kind of go through that list. I went back and looked at emails. I looked at meeting notes and kind of compiled all that. And that's all I have to say for right now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Dayhoff, you've been quiet today. That's out of the norm.
Well, what's the fiscal note on the comprehensive traffic study? We have a director of public works and we have a chief of police who are much more knowledgeable about these issues than I am. I'm a landscape contractor and a farmer. I think we ought to follow their recommendation. I think of all the solutions and suggestions, I guess I was one of the, I first suggested that we put a no through truck sign up there, and that seemed to be complicated. It seems like no matter what we do, there's going to be the consequences of unintended, there's going to be unintended consequences that very well may be just as deleterious as the problem. I have suggested to the one homeowner there that he put bollards up strategically in front of the garage. In my capacity as a property manager years ago, I solved those problems on a number of occasions in Westminster and down in Baltimore City, and solved them very successfully. And as a matter of fact, I just solved a problem like that on my own farm by putting bollards up. I thought the price point and the cost benefit analysis was definitely favorable to putting the bollards up down at the farm. But I think that Mr. Glass, what perhaps is the fiscal note on the traffic study?
So I just looked it up. It's in the $20,000 range.
Problem's been going on for 4 years, Mr. Chair, and the chief of police and the mayor and the public works director have all suggested that we do a traffic study. I think that's kind of overwhelming, and I believe Mr. Glass, or was it Mr. Chief Ledwell, has suggested that we do the comprehensive one. Maybe it was the mayor. I think we need to do the comprehensive traffic study. This is beyond my wheelhouse. If you want, I'll make a motion that we do the traffic study.
Well, hold on. Let me
Yes, sir.
let me speak here on that.
Yes, sir.
So I think that with regards to the traffic study, I agree with the mayor that now, Mr. Glass, this traffic study, the $20,000 ones, is this because there's two issues, okay, as the chief astutely pointed out, all right? There is overall truck traffic throughout the city, okay? That is the issue, which the council has discussed in the past, all right? But, like any business or municipality, there is a laundry list of things that you need to get done, and it hasn't been on the top 10 of that list. You're going through an $80 million renovation of our plant. We're trying to figure out how to balance the fiber project fund, among 50 other things, So my question is that the $20,000 study is related specifically to the alley?
Only to the Union Alley between, pretty much between Liberty
Anchor
Street
Bond.
and Anchor Street. That's correct.
So I don't necessarily agree that that is the best course to take, because there have unintended consequences, of that, that I don't think, as the mayor pointed out, would solve all of these issues. And furthermore, making it one way or not one way or closing the alley, as Mr. Glass pointed out as well, trucks are still going to go back there. And, multiple residents have structures that are close to the alley, so it's not going to prevent property damage. That's no guarantee, So certainly, I believe it's in the strategic plan for the city. Overall truck traffic throughout the entire city is definitely something that we should be looking at when we have the means to do it. The second thing, I guess, is Mr. Dayhoff asked about, anytime any property owner has damage to their property, they have recourse, filing a police report. This property, I think, has a camera there that, they know who is hitting, their property. And, I'm just kind of curious, like, what recourse have they pursued, other than asking the city? Maybe Mr. Dayhoff, you said put up, what do you said, like a pole or something?
Ballards.
Right. Has that been explored? I don't think at this point, shutting down an alley or shooting from the hip is going to be, I think it's going to be more of an overreaction to an isolated incident, and could have far-reaching negative impacts on the surrounding residents or businesses, you know, and I think that the residents' concern about making it about safety, you know, you start changing around traffic patterns, like what is the impact to the pedestrian safety around, you know, specifically the parking lot next to it? Because I mean, Jeff, we know that trucks are going to cut through that parking lot, and that could create a safety issue, you know, people getting out of their car to go to rock salt, you know, and you've got, you know, 10-ton trucks, you know, or whatever they are, you know, flying through that parking lot. So I think that's a safety issue there, you know.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Dayhoff.
I'm only one vote, but I'm not going to support closing the alley. That was one of the ideas that I had preliminarily explored, but once we explored it, I think routing traffic through that parking lot's a safety concern. That being said, Public Works Committee is pretty powerful, but it doesn't outweigh the alley closing committee when it comes to closing a public street. So that would have to be referred to the to the alley closing committee.
I did not know that committee existed, but thank you.
Yeah, it's convened a number of times in the last number of years. But I'm with you, Mr. Chair. I'm worried about the unintended consequences. I'm worried about looking at a solution that's going to cause more problems than the problem itself. I think we have a responsibility as homeowners to contribute to the greater good of the community, and I believe that Ballards would solve a lot of the problem. But if that's I have to defer to a traffic study engineer, and I've worked with traffic study engineers in the past on various issues. I'm not sure what they're going to come up with, but this is beyond me.
So I think that what I would suggest is that we as a Public Works Committee revisit the overall comprehensive traffic study, you know, and just bring it up to the council that, look, we have talked about this, you know, what is the appetite? Do we even have it in the budget? Like I said, I know this budget process is going to be incredibly difficult, you know, trying to balance, you know, the fiber fund and among other priorities in the city. So I have no problem having that discussion. But at this point, you know, I really don't think that taking action, shooting from the hip of, you know, closing alleys or making one way. I mean, if signage, I have no problem with signage. But again, I think the chief, you know, then there's that enforcement issue. Does that really fix the issue? Certainly, if our experts think that signage could help, I would welcome the signage. I think, don't we even make the signs ourselves, Mr. Glass?
Yes, we do. If I could just add two things, and this is kind of on the heels of what the mayor said. I think our opportunity to solve all the problems, in my experience, never exists. We never can solve every problem. I think he's 100% right there. But I think, you know, what we do have the opportunity to do is to alleviate some of the concerns. That's one point. The second point is, with regard to the traffic study, I don't want to assume that that's going to mean that the result is to close or create one-way alleys in any direction, because it may also prove that, and I think that's the direction that you're kind of heading, that it's really not something that can be solved, and it's an issue that we it is not to the point that that action is necessary. That is a 100% another option that that the data could show.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Dayhoff.
I mean, I feel rather strongly about not closing the alley, but as far as the traffic study is concerned, I'm not necessarily wedded to it. I want to refer it to consideration of the rest of the council members and see what they have to say about it. And when you look at all the possible solutions, the traffic study is a Hail Mary, because I just don't know what to do about the problem.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, so I agree with Mr. Dayhoff largely on this because, and that's why I wanted to bring up the list of issues, because at the end of the day, the traffic study is all well and good if we have some solutions on the table that we're going to consider. But if the solutions that would be the only possible solutions to move forward are things that, enough people on the council wouldn't consider, then that makes the traffic study less, at that point, if we're not going to do anything that the traffic study would suggest, why do the traffic study? I don't know that that's the case, because at the end of the day, this has got to go to the council anyway. The council's got to make the decision to study or not. I think it's just our job here to flesh out as much info as possible, make a summary to the council, and then, as a council, the council can make a decision, and I can sign off on it if it all makes sense, and go for it. I just think, and I already think we shared enough information with each other on this in this meeting to help us make a more informed, better decision on that. So I guess the other question I had, and Mr. Glass, you might. Well, I actually have two questions. Mr. Glass, you might know this, you may not. How far off of the alley is this structure? Because it's like a matter of inches, from what I've seen, but. I don't know if it's like 3 inches. I mean, it's like really close. So if the real issue here, all of this is solving all these other problems around this, but if the real issue is just that there's a structure that's too close to the road, maybe the action we take is from now on, we talk to planning and zoning, and we look into how far structures should be. I mean, I know that's pretty standard in terms of new construction these days. But if a structure like that was ever like replaced or anything, should the city allow structures to be built 3 inches from a road? That's the real issue. The real issue here is there's a structure that like touches the alley on this. So how far back is that, Mr. Glass? Do you know?
It's very near the edge of pavement. When you mention inches, clearly I've not measured it. I don't think anyone has, but it is very, very close. It's for all intents and purposes, it's right against the edge of pavement.
Yeah, I mean, there's a side view mirror. I mean, it's like it's really close.
Yeah.
Mr. Glass.
Yes, sir.
Question. Okay. The structure. I remember that Alyssa had mentioned the structure was somehow built without like a permit, but prior to the current residence. Is that accurate?
So I really can't speak to that.
Okay.
I don't know that it wasn't built with a permit. I think there was a question on her part as if it was, but
Okay.
At that
Okay,
time,
that's fine.
Well,
That's
I
fine.
really
One
can't
more,
speak.
one more question, Mr. Dale. Mr. Glass. The structure though was built by the prior residents. We know that.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. You've been around here a long time. How many issues did you have with this, with the other residents that you can remember?
So as I said in my initial description of the problem, I'm sure there were issues there. I'm sure there were issues not just in this alley, but in all alleys, just because of the nature of the alleys. I don't recall there being anything particular with that property, but I really can't say that prior to the last 15 years or so, because I wasn't in this capacity, I wouldn't have known about that. But I don't recall anything again in the last 15 or so years.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dayhoff.
If I'm not mistaken, the garage that's there now replaced the garage that was damaged in the Guyman fire. And the way our current code reads, a person has a right to replace a structure as it existed before the fire damage or a tornado damage. However, if it were replaced under other circumstances, it would have to be subjected to a setback. As a matter of fact, we have that we have that discussion occurring in another part of town as we speak. But I don't, perhaps in hindsight, it wasn't prudent to put that garage right on the alley. But this is where we are, this is where we are today. I fall back on, I think if you look at the overall expense of a traffic study and you look at the overall expense of Ballards, there's simply no contest. Ballards simply are not that expensive. And I have them to protect my shed on the farm. And it was a lot less expensive to put the Ballards in than it was to repair damage to the shed. But like I said, the only solution that I have found viable at this point in time is to do a Hail Mary and see if a traffic engineer can come up with a solution, because I don't know of a solution other than the Ballards. I simply don't know. And I don't know what our, Mr. Yingling, I don't know what our colleagues are going to decide as far as a traffic study. What's the cost benefit of a traffic study? I know that alley pretty darn well. And I've not heard any complaints other than this one.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Dayhoff.
know most of the property owners along that alley in that stretch, and this is the only complaint that we have. It's a big city. We
Yeah,
have a lot
I'd
of
agree.
respons- we have a lot of responsibility.
It's a big city. So,
So what's the cost?
okay, so I think that we've all kind of, now we're kind of going back and around in a circle right now. So let's so at this point, we're gonna recommend to the council that we're not closing the alley, and
No.
that a comprehensive overall citywide study should be considered. Sure, the finance committee will be looking at that. So we'll see if the funds and resources are there to do that. So
And I want to be clear, Mr. Chair. I'm not saying I'm supporting the traffic study. I believe that we ought to discuss this with our other colleagues. I think collective wisdom is going to definitely be in order. It's a big city. There's a lot of things going on. And I'm going to be curious as the cost benefit analysis of spending money on a traffic study. Maybe I think what the chief was suggesting earlier, and maybe what you're suggesting is that we do maybe a traffic study that's a little bit more broad sweeping for that area. And maybe I'll entertain that, maybe I won't. But I would like to discuss this with our other, I would like to discuss this with our other colleagues. Mr. Yingling, you and I, we work with some pretty smart folks.
thank you, Mr. Dayhoff. That's how we're going to move forward then.
Thank you.
Unless the mayor had anything else.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's the way to go. The only thing I had left is I want to know about this alley closing committee. Was it a committee or a commission? Is it defunct? Is it in our charter? Like I have heard you mention it before, Mr. Dayhoff, but I don't know anything else about it. I'd like to know.
Let me see if I can find it quickly. Yeah, we've used it several times. Remember, Mr. Glass, we used it over there on the Matthias edition, up above west of Washington Road. It came up also with that cartway that led up to Grace Lutheran Church off of John Street. It came up with the cartway out at Bolton Hill, out near where you live, Mr. Mayor. There's a cartway out there. It came up in reference to that. But I used it a number of times when I was mayor. And you know what? I will find it immediately after the meeting is over, but while the meeting is going on, I probably will never find it.
So what was it, a committee? Was it like a committee appointed by, made up of council members appointed by the council president, or was it a commission appointed by the mayor and approved by the council? Like what was the makeup of it?
Yeah, I'm looking at a memo from July the 19th, 2000 from me. No, actually, interestingly enough, I kept remembering it that I did it when I was mayor. Actually, Mary Yowen did it. Mary Yowen did it in July 19th, 2000. And the memo reads, we've received 2 separate alley closing requests for consideration. Mary Owen's recommendation. No, this is from Tom Baird. This is from Tom Baird, and Tom Baird recommended that the mayor appoint 3 individuals. And as a matter of fact, it was Mr. Cavacci, Oberhair, and Shane White, 3 distinguished individuals in the community were appointed to the alley closing committee.
Which Mr. Cavacci?
Roy.
Right.
Yeah, and there was the one at Grace Lutheran Church. There was the one at Westminster at the Union National Bank branch, and then there was one from a private citizen, Scott Jesnick. But I thought it was and I've heard of it before when Mr. Babylon was the council president for 25 years. That was my father-in-law, and he spoke of it also. The alley. It's called. I think it's. Is it called the Street Closing Commission?
I believe so. I think that
Yeah.
was, there's a formal
Yeah.
process for it in that regards, petitioning the council. for
The
action.
city of Westminster has an awful lot of paper alleys and paper streets. These are streets and alleys that have never, ever been paved. They've never, ever been used. And then we have that on the one hand, and then you have on the other hand, the city of Westminster has an awful lot of streets that are located on private property. They've just always been public use. And I think that gets us back to Mr. Chair. It's a big city. It's very complicated.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for the
I can send
history.
those memos out to y'all if you want.
Sure. If you'd like, in the interest of time, because I know these directors, they've got a lot going on specific.
And I do
right
too.
now. I know you do too. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that. But let's move on to the other agenda. Chief, I think you don't need to be on for the water reuse. So you have a good day. Be safe out there. Thank you for your input as well.
Thanks, Chief.
Okay.
Thanks, Chief.
All right. Water reuse update. Definitely want to hear what's going on. I know the survey went out, which I know that some residents have commented on social media that they got it, which is great. Huge part to the water reuse project is the public relations, probably the most important part.
It is. Yeah.
Educating the public and making them feel comfortable. So Jeff, if you want to, feel free to blow through this unless there's super pertinent stuff we need to discuss, because I know your guys' time is valuable. All right.
Okay, I'll just let you know where we are with the USBR schedule right now. We're making headway right now. We're waiting on acceptance of leases for some of the pre-filtration units and post-disinfection stuff. What's that mean? There are we own the reverse osmosis pilot unit, but there are some parts that will be before that and after that that we have to lease for the duration of the pilot. One of those leases has most recently been signed. The second one is still in a legal wrangle, so that's not been done yet. I have to have both units at the same time to start the assembly of the process, and what I don't want to do is have the lease signed for one and then start paying rent on that before we have the other, for instance. So much hangs on the acceptance of this last lease, because I am concerned that that's going to push us off of our approved schedule with USBR. The pilot room, as you recall, that was a retrofit that we had to do. And that started in November. The schedule calls for that to be complete on the February 15th, and it is complete, and we're ready for all the leased equipment. That portion of the project has worked. It's been like clockwork. So that's really good. The next phase we have to do is, of course, once we get through the legal issues, we have to build the the pilot with these leased units and have that set up complete by the 15th of March. A lot of things have to happen before that. We still have to have our delivery of the units as well once we get through the legal issues with that. That startup will continue from the 15th of March to the end of March. That's the basically a time to get the bugs worked out once everything's been assembled. And then the pilot period will actually start on April 1st and go through December 1st. With regard to the public education part of that, I'm sure you'll recall that we engaged Katz and Associates for the public outreach parts. They've most recently developed a draft fact sheet. I emphasize draft, and again, that's part of the public outreach, but it's been recent enough that I'll speak for myself. I don't think Ms. Matthews has had the opportunity to submit comments on that. I know that I have not, but I expect that to be in the very near future as well. One other thing that that we are in the process of doing is we've engaged CMC to coordinate some video footage of the assembly of the units as well once that starts. The idea is, and I'm not a videographer, but it's been referred to as B footage. So what we want to do there is capture some of that assembly work, and it will be included into a larger production video that will be used for public education, as the pilot study progresses then as well. So we're not ready for that just yet, but we will be once we get to the assembly parts of that. You made mention of the citizen survey. So that all should be out now within the last 30 days. The next step is once we get the responses back is the data analysis and then move forward from what we have learned from that survey. And that's pretty much where we are with USBR, unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. And I encourage anybody watching, please, if you get that survey, it was sent out to, I think it was random members.
It was
inside and outside the city, the entire water sewer service area. Please fill that out. It's of utmost importance to us. And really this program of water reuse is going to, this is, I know the mayor and some of the other councils talk about cathedral thinking. This is the future of Westminster, the future of our sustainability. So thank you, Mr. Glass. One quick question. How are we looking on the flows? I know we've done a lot of I&I. How's the sewer flows looking?
So it's absolutely been a change. If you recall, it wasn't just too many years ago, we had sustained flows in excess of 5 million gallons per day, which is the limit of the design size of the treatment plant. Right now we are at times under 4 million gallons per day. So the work that we've done so far has certainly been fruitful.
Well, fantastic. I mean, you guys are just doing a fantastic job. Thank you for your hard work, obviously, with everything that you do, you, John, and of course, your entire department. So that being said, any final comments, questions? I think that was the last thing on the agenda. Anything from you, Mr. Dayoff?
No, we wanted to discuss the Center Street outfall project for a second or two.
Oh, I'm
But,
sorry. I don't have the agenda in front of me. So yeah, sure. We can move on to that.
Yeah. But I wanted to thank Mr. Glass for all his work on the water reuse project and the pilot program. So that little room that was being constructed at wastewater treatment, that's fairly completed.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. And that's another cost savings for the city of Westminster, based upon the ingenuity and the hard work of our employees who came up with and retrofitted that room and did the work themselves. And I think that's to be applauded. And Mr. Yingling, I also want to say what I have said privately, that, my hat's off to you for your leadership on the water reuse project. I'm getting good feedback. I was concerned, but I'm getting good feedback. I think increasingly folks are understanding this, and this water reuse is done in other areas of the world and other areas of the country very, very successfully. And I think that, you know, we're providing some leadership here on the East Coast, and I take my hat off to you. This is something we really need to do. So I appreciate all the work on it. Not only that, scientifically, I just find it all fascinating. It's just fascinating. Thank
Cool.
you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Dayhoff, for the praise, but this couldn't have been made possible without Governor Hogan, Secretary of Environment Ben Grumbles, our delegation. The mayor
Yeah.
was very involved in this, and
Yes.
frankly, Mr. Glass
Yes.
has been on it. I mean, going down to Washington, you know, getting the grants.
Yes.
I mean, and I know John's been involved too. I don't mean to take anything away from you, John, but I mean, it really top to bottom has been a team effort.
Yeah.
So, we
Yeah,
appreciate
yes, it
that.
has. Yes.
Okay, so let's move on to the final agenda item. It was Center Street. Sorry, the agenda. I don't have it in front of me. So go
All
ahead.
good.
Yes, sir. Recently the city was alerted to a serious erosion issue at a large storm drain outfall, and it's near the intersection of Court and Center Streets, kind of right across the road from where the health department's located. Once we were alerted of the problem, we opted to utilize some term contractors that are contracted with Carroll County for this type of repair and design work. Of course, all that met the city's procurement with regard to competition and award of the same. We began the agreement and contract process based on the received proposals, and that was back in January 19th of 21. And Carroll Land Services was the designer that was selected. Right now, the agreement with Carroll Land Services is I believe is final in legal review and has been forwarded for signatures, and that was as of February 17th. The design timeframe will be dependent upon some of the timeliness of permitting and our coordination with MDE, but I'm anticipating that it will be within the next few months. MDE's, and I don't mean to throw them under the bus, but COVID has affected MDE as much as it has anyone else. And sometimes the permitting side is slow in the first place, but adding the COVID issues has even slowed it a little further. I guess the last part of this is that once we have the design complete, we need to understand also that there will be a separate contract for the construction portions. And that's going to be necessary, of course, when we get there. We're just not there yet. We have to get the design done first. So the other thing I'm looking for is hopefully once we have Carroll Land on board is an engineer's estimate, so I can better accurately predict what the costs are for the budget instead of referring to my Nostradamus mustache. So that's unless there are questions, that's all I have on that.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. Any questions from the committee?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Dayhoff.
It's an interesting project. You know, the history of that project goes all the way back to the playground. That area was mined for the stone that was used at the playground. See, just as an FYI, I guess I'm showing my age, but Carroll Land Services was very instrumental in helping us bring forward the stormwater management regulations back in 1972. So that's an excellent choice as far as working with them. But I'm still kind of baffled. We worked hard at coming up with a standard contract over on the county side to address these matters. And I think it would have been a little bit more efficient if the city had just simply used that county contract. I think it would have certainly qualified under the sole source procurement portion of our code. I don't think we should mess around with stormwater management stuff. I think it needs to be done efficiently and effectively and quickly, because that that erosion, that definitely has a deleterious impact on the bay.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Dayhoff. Anything else, Mr. Mayor? Any comment?
Not for me.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else on the agenda, appreciate everybody's time this morning, and you all have a very safe weekend.